was kidnapped by my ex and held captive in a remote cabin in the woods. It's taken me a while to feel like I could talk about this. I've been through therapy, changed cities, tried to move on, but no matter what I do, those 2 days still replay in my head over and over again. This all happened about 2 years ago, and honestly, I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to feel safe again. So about 2 years ago, I was living in a small town near Seattle. I had just gotten out of a toxic relationship with my ex, Sam. Things had been rough between us for months before we finally broke up. He was controlling, manipulative, and would do everything in his power to make me feel guilty for wanting to leave. The emotional blackmail was constant, and he had this way of twisting everything I said to make it sound like I was the bad guy. I don't know how I stayed with him as long as I did, but when I finally left, I felt a weight lift off me. For the first few weeks after the breakup, things were quiet. Sam didn't reach out, didn't try to show up at my place, nothing. I was relieved, and thought that maybe, just maybe, he had accepted it and was going to move on with his life too. I didn't hear from him for about a month, and then out of nowhere, he started calling and texting me. The messages started off calm enough, saying he missed me and wanted to talk. When I didn't respond, they got more intense. He would call me at all hours of the night, send long paragraphs about how much he loved me, how I was ruining his life by leaving him, how he couldn't live without me. I blocked his number, but he just used different ones. Then he started showing up at places he knew I'd be, like the grocery store or the coffee shop I liked. I'd see him across the street, just staring at me, but he wouldn't come over. It was enough to freak me out, though. I started feeling like I couldn't go anywhere without looking over my shoulder. I told some friends about it, and they advised me to get a restraining order, but at that point I didn't think it was serious enough to involve the police. I thought he would eventually give up and move on. I was wrong. One night I was leaving work late. I worked at a small marketing firm, and it was one of those nights where a deadline had kept me at the office later than usual. It was already dark when I stepped outside, but the walk to my car wasn't far. I parked in a small lot, just a block away from my office in downtown Seattle. I remember how quiet the streets were. It wasn't unusual for the area, especially on a weeknight, but something about the silence that night felt different. The only sound was my footsteps echoing on the pavement. I unlocked my car, got in, and started the engine. I barely noticed the figure in my rearview mirror until it was too late. Before I could react, the back door flew open, and someone jumped into the back seat. I felt cold metal against my neck, and my heart stopped. It was Sam. He was breathing heavily, muttering something I couldn't make out. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, but the shock had frozen me in place. I felt the knife press harder against my skin as he told me to drive. I didn't say anything. I just did what he told me. We drove for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes. He made me take back roads, avoiding any main streets or highways. I had no idea where we were going, and the whole time I kept thinking that this couldn't be real. This kind of stuff didn't happen to people like me. I kept waiting for him to calm down, for him to explain why he was doing this, but he didn't say much. The only thing he kept repeating was that he needed me to understand something, though I couldn't figure out what it was. Eventually, we turned down a gravel road that led into the woods. The further we went, the less I recognized where we were. It wasn't until I saw the cabin that I realized we were deep in some kind of forest. I didn't know it at the time, but later I found out we were somewhere near Mount Rainier National Park. I had been there a few times for hiking trips, but I had never gone this far off the beaten path. The cabin was old and looked like it hadn't been used in years. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, and there was no sign of civilization anywhere. No other cabins, no roads, nothing. Sam told me to get out of the car. I was shaking so badly I could barely move, but I forced myself to comply. He kept the knife close to my side as he led me inside. The inside of the cabin was as run down as the outside. There was dust everywhere, and the furniture looked like it had been abandoned a long time ago. The only thing that seemed out of place was the few supplies Sam had brought with him. Some blankets, canned food, water bottles. It was clear he had been planning this. He tied my hands with some kind of rope and made me sit on the floor in the corner of the room. I remember the cold from the wooden floor seeping into my legs. He told me again that I needed to understand him, that this was the only way for me to truly see what he had been trying to tell me all along. I had no idea what he meant, and honestly, I didn't care. All I could think about was surviving. I tried to stay calm, tried to focus on finding a way out, but there wasn't much I could do tied up in the middle of nowhere. The first night was the worst. Every time he moved, I flinched, thinking he was going to snap and do something horrible. But he didn't. He just sat across from me, watching me, occasionally mumbling to himself. I tried to stay awake, but at some point, exhaustion took over, and I must have fallen asleep because when I opened my eyes, the room was filled with early morning light. Sam was still there, sitting in the same spot, watching me. I don't know how much time passed after that. The hours blended together. I couldn't tell if it was morning or afternoon, and I had no way of keeping track of time. Every now and then, Sam would get up and pace around the cabin, checking the windows or walking outside to look around. I had no idea what he was waiting for, but he seemed on edge, like he was expecting something to happen. The silence between us was unbearable. The whole time I was trying to think of a way to escape, but with my hands tied and Sam so close, there was no opportunity. It wasn't until the second day that I finally saw a chance. Sam had been going outside more frequently, and each time he did, he left the door unlocked. He must have thought I was too scared to try anything. The thought of running through the woods with no shoes, no idea where I was, and no guarantee of finding help was terrifying. But the alternative, staying in that cabin with Sam, was worse. When he left to get more firewood, I knew it was my only chance. My heart was racing as I struggled to untie the ropes around my wrists. It took longer than I thought it would, and every second I expected him to walk back in and catch me. But finally I got my hands free. I stood up, legs shaking, and quietly crept to the door. The cold air hit me as soon as I stepped outside, but I didn't stop. I ran. I didn't know which direction to go. I just ran as fast as I could into the woods. The trees were thick and the ground was uneven, but I didn't care. My bare feet were bleeding and I could hear branches snapping behind me as I crashed through the undergrowth. I didn't know if Sam was chasing me, and I didn't dare look back to check. I just kept running, hoping that I would find a road or a house or anything that would lead to safety. I don't know how long I ran for. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. But then, through the trees, I saw something. A road. It was a small dirt road, barely wide enough for a car. But it was the first sign of civilization I had seen since we left the main road. I stumbled toward it, barely able to stay upright when I saw a car coming toward me. I don't think I've ever felt such a mix of relief and fear in my life. The car stopped, and the driver, a middle-aged man who looked as shocked as I felt, got out and helped me into his car. He called the police. And that's when everything started to feel like a blur. The next few hours were a whirlwind. The police came and I was taken to the hospital to be checked out. I had cuts and bruises all over my body and I was dehydrated, but physically I was okay. Emotionally, though, I was a wreck. The police found Sam not far from the cabin, and he was arrested without much of a struggle. I didn't go back to my apartment after that. I couldn't. I packed up what I could and moved to a new city to try to start over. I'm safe now, but those 2 days will always be with me. Every time I walk alone at night, every time I hear an unexpected noise, every time I get in my car, I think about what happened. I still don't understand what Sam was trying to achieve by taking me to that cabin, and maybe I never will, but I survived. I found out my ex had been secretly living in my house for weeks after we broke up. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to write something like this. Honestly, it still feels surreal, like some kind of twisted story you'd hear in a movie. But this actually happened. And it still gives me chills when I think about it. It's been a little over a year now. And while I've tried to put it behind me, I'm not sure if I'll ever really get over it. I had been in a relationship with Ethan for about 3 years. We met through mutual friends, and at first everything seemed normal. He was funny, charming, and we clicked almost instantly. But after a while, his true colors started showing. He had a temper, and it didn't take much to set him off. At first, it was just little things. He'd get mad if I didn't text him back right away or if I made plans without him. I chalked it up to him being passionate, maybe a little insecure. And I thought things would get better with time. They didn't. Over the next year, the temper got worse. He'd go from 0 to enraged in seconds over the smallest things. I remember one time we were at a restaurant and the waiter brought me the wrong drink. I didn't even care, but Ethan started yelling at the guy, causing a scene. It was embarrassing, and I realized that wasn't normal behavior. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always turned it around, making it seem like I was overreacting or that I didn't appreciate him. It was exhausting. Eventually, I knew I had to leave. It wasn't easy because, despite everything, there were still good moments, and I kept hoping he would change. But after 3 years, I couldn't take it anymore. I ended things with him, and as expected, he didn't take it well. There were a lot of angry texts, phone calls, and him showing up at my apartment unannounced. I blocked his number and thought that would be the end of it. For a while, things were quiet. A few months went by without any major incidents. I started to feel like I could finally move on with my life. I was living alone in a small apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, and even though I was a little on edge after the breakup, I started feeling comfortable again. But then, weird things started happening. It started with small stuff, things that were easy to explain away. I'd come home from work and notice that something wasn't where I left it. I'm not the most organized person, so I figured I had just forgotten moving things around. A book I had been reading would be on a different shelf, or I'd find my keys in a different place than usual. At first I didn't think much of it. Life was busy and I was distracted. But as the days went on, more things started going missing. Small, random items like a spoon from the kitchen or a sock from the laundry. Then, one night, I heard noises coming from the kitchen while I was in bed. It was around 2 a.m., and I was half asleep when I heard what sounded like someone moving things around. My heart started pounding, and I immediately thought someone had broken in. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to the door, ready to call the police. But when I reached the kitchen, no one was there. The window was closed, the front door was locked, and nothing seemed out of place. I convinced myself it must have been the building settling or maybe something outside that I misheard. But after that, I started feeling uneasy in my own apartment. Every little creak or noise made my skin crawl. I started double-checking the locks on my doors and windows every night, even setting up a cheap security camera near my front door. The camera wasn't anything fancy, just something I could monitor from my phone. I hoped it would give me some peace of mind. One morning, I woke up to find a few more things out of place. Nothing major, just little things like the salt shaker being on the counter instead of in the cabinet where I always kept it. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but something felt off. That afternoon, I checked the footage from the camera on my phone. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I saw myself leaving for work, coming home, and locking the door behind me. But then, late at night, there was a small movement in the corner of the screen. I rewound the footage and saw it more clearly. A shadowy figure moving near the edge of the frame. It looked like someone was in my apartment after I had gone to bed. My stomach dropped. I immediately called the police and told them what I had seen. They came over and did a sweep of the apartment, but they didn't find anything. No sign of forced entry, nothing stolen, no sign of anyone hiding in the apartment. They told me it was probably a glitch in the camera or a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. I was freaked out, but I didn't know what to do. I considered moving, but with rent prices in Seattle being what they were, it wasn't that simple. The next few days were quiet, and I started to wonder if maybe I was losing my mind. I was jumpy all the time, barely sleeping, and constantly checking the camera footage. One night, I went to bed early, exhausted from work and stress. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of something crashing in the living room. This time, it was unmistakable. Something had fallen or been knocked over. My heart was racing as I crept out of bed and slowly made my way toward the living room. I didn't turn on the lights, hoping to catch whoever was in there off guard. But when I got to the living room, it was empty. I turned on the lights, and there in the middle of the floor was a picture frame that had been on the shelf. It wasn't like it had just fallen off. It looked like it had been thrown. I grabbed my phone and called the police again. When they arrived, they found the same thing. No signs of forced entry, no one in the apartment, nothing missing. I was starting to feel like I was going crazy. They suggested I stay with a friend for a few days, just in case, and I took their advice. I stayed with my friend Megan for a few nights, and during that time I had a locksmith come out and change all the locks on my apartment just to be safe. I also installed a new security system with motion sensors and cameras in every room. By the time I went back to my apartment, I was still on edge. But I felt like I had taken every possible precaution. The first night back was quiet. I didn't hear any strange noises, and nothing seemed out of place. I thought maybe things were finally starting to get back to normal. But the second night, everything changed. I had just gotten home from work and was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a strange noise coming from the ceiling, like something was moving above me. I lived on the top floor of my building, so there shouldn't have been anyone above me. My first thought was that it might be an animal or something, but the noise didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. My blood ran cold. I stood frozen in the kitchen, listening as the footsteps continued. They moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, stopping directly above me. I grabbed a knife from the counter and backed up toward the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I was about to call the police again when I heard a loud thud coming from the attic hatch in the hallway. I didn't even think about checking the attic. I ran out of the apartment as fast as I could and called the police from my car. When they arrived, they searched the entire building, including the attic. What they found still makes me sick to my stomach. There was a makeshift living area in the attic, an old sleeping bag, some empty food containers, and clothes that weren't mine. Whoever had been up there had been living in the attic for weeks, maybe even longer. They had been coming down into my apartment while I was at work or asleep, moving things around, eating my food, and God knows what else. The police told me that it looked like someone had been accessing the attic through a small door in the hallway closet. The closet had a false wall that led into the attic, and it was so well hidden that I had never noticed it before. That's when it hit me. Ethan. It had to be him. I told the police about my ex and his temper, and they started looking into it. I gave them everything I had, texts, emails, anything that might help. But by the time they searched his place, he was gone. They never found him. To this day, I don't know where he went or what happened to him, but the thought that he had been living in my house, watching me, waiting for the right moment to... I don't even want to think about it. I moved out of that apartment as soon as I could, and I've been in therapy ever since. I don't feel safe in my own home anymore, no matter where I live. The worst part is knowing that he could still be out there, watching, waiting. I haven't heard from him since, but the damage was done. I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps above me, and I'll never stop wondering what would have happened if I hadn't left that night. My ex hacked into all my accounts and used them to blackmail me for months. It's hard to explain how terrifying it is when someone takes over your entire life, controls what you do, who you can talk to, and every move you make, without even physically being there. This is the story of how my ex, Matt, completely destroyed my sense of safety and privacy by hacking into my personal accounts and blackmailing me for months after we broke up. I still don't know how I managed to get through it, but I hope that sharing this might help someone else who's going through something similar. I was with Matt for almost 2 years. We met through mutual friends, and at first everything seemed fine. He was a bit controlling, but I didn't see it for what it was until way later. When we first got together, I thought he was just really invested in the relationship. He'd always ask me where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing, but in a way that seemed like he just wanted to be involved in my life. It didn't feel overbearing at first. I thought it was sweet that he cared so much. Over time, though, it got worse. He'd get angry if I didn't text him back immediately, or if I made plans without telling him first. He would guilt-trip me if I wanted to go out with friends instead of staying in with him. Looking back, I can see that these were all red flags. But at the time, I just brushed it off. I didn't want to cause any drama, and I figured that maybe I was overreacting. It wasn't until after we broke up that I realized how much worse things could get. The breakup wasn't exactly amicable. I had finally gotten fed up with Matt's behavior and decided that I needed to get out. He didn't take it well. At first, he tried to convince me to stay, saying he would change, that he would do whatever it took to make things right. But I had already made up my mind, and after a few emotional conversations, we ended things. Or so I thought. A couple of weeks after the breakup, strange things started happening. It started small, like a missed email or a message from a friend that I swore I hadn't seen before. Then one day, I went to log into my Facebook account, and the password didn't work. I tried a few different variations, thinking maybe I had just forgotten it, but nothing worked. I ended up using the forgot password option and resetting it, and that's when I noticed something strange. There were messages in my inbox that I hadn't sent. They were sent to people I didn't even know, and the tone was off. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I had been hacked by some random person, so I changed my password and moved on. A few days later, the same thing happened with my email account. Once again, I reset the password and checked the activity. That's when I started to get worried. Someone had been going through my personal emails, conversations with friends, family, even work-related stuff. The worst part was that whoever it was had downloaded attachments like personal documents and photos. I felt sick to my stomach. At first, I thought maybe it was just some random hacker. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it had to be Matt. Matt had always been weirdly interested in my passwords and security questions while we were together. He would make jokes about how we shouldn't have any secrets from each other and that he could figure out my passwords easily if he wanted to. I never gave it much thought at the time, but now it seemed obvious. He must have been collecting my personal information while we were together, waiting for the right moment to use it. I confronted him about it, but of course he denied everything. He acted offended that I would even accuse him of something like that. But deep down, I knew it was him. I didn't have proof at that point, but I knew. That's when things really started spiraling out of control. One day I got a message from an unknown number. It was Matt. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. He told me that he had access to all of my accounts, email, social media, even my work accounts. He had hacked into everything and had collected all sorts of personal information about me. He knew things about my life that I hadn't even shared with my closest friends. And then he said that if I didn't start talking to him again, he would release everything. He had private photos, conversations, and even sensitive work documents. He threatened to send everything to my family, my friends, and even my employer. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought about going to the police, but I didn't have any hard evidence, just a feeling that Matt was behind it. Plus, I didn't want my personal information to get out there. If he really had all the stuff he claimed, going to the police might push him to follow through with his threats. I was trapped. For weeks, I lived in constant fear. Every day, I would get messages from Matt. Sometimes they were angry, accusing me of ruining his life by breaking up with him. Other times, he would act like nothing was wrong and try to have a normal conversation with me, like we were still together. But the underlying threat was always there. He would remind me that he had all the power, and that if I didn't do what he wanted, he would ruin my life. I tried to keep my distance, but the anxiety was unbearable. I couldn't focus at work. I stopped going out with friends, and I became paranoid about everything. I started checking all my accounts obsessively, trying to stay one step ahead of him. But no matter how many times I changed my passwords or updated my security settings, he always found a way back in. It felt like he was watching everything I did, even though I couldn't physically see him. The worst part was that I had no idea what his end game was. It wasn't like he was asking for money or anything like that. He just wanted control. He wanted me to be scared, and he wanted to remind me that no matter what I did, he was always there, lurking in the background. It was like psychological warfare, and I was losing. One day I got a message that sent me into full-blown panic mode. Matt had somehow gotten access to my bank account. He didn't take any money, but he sent me a screenshot of my account balance, along with a message that said he could drain it anytime he wanted. I freaked out. I immediately called my bank and froze my account, but the damage was done. He had proven that he could get to me in ways I hadn't even considered. That's when I knew I couldn't keep dealing with this on my own. I had to get help. I finally went to the police and filed a report. I showed them all the messages, the emails, and the evidence I had gathered over the weeks. They took it seriously, which was a relief, but they also told me that these cases can be tricky, especially when it comes to cyber harassment. They advised me to change all my passwords again and to contact a lawyer about getting a restraining order. I did everything they suggested, but it didn't stop Matt. He kept finding ways to get into my accounts kept sending me messages, kept threatening me. It was like a never-ending nightmare. I felt completely powerless. Even though I had taken every precaution, he was always one step ahead. Then one day, everything came to a head. I got an email from my employer saying that there had been an attempted breach of our company's internal system. The IT team had traced the IP address, and it led back to my home network. I was horrified. I knew Matt had done it, but explaining that to my employer was a whole different problem. I had to sit down with HR and try to explain the situation without sounding like I had brought this on myself. I didn't want them to think I was careless with company security, but at the same time, I had to be honest about what was happening in my personal life. It was humiliating. Luckily, my employer was understanding, and they didn't fire me. But the situation made me realize that this wasn't just about my personal life anymore. Matt was trying to sabotage my entire future. He wasn't just threatening me, he was threatening my livelihood. The police stepped up their investigation after the breach. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, they were able to track Matt down. They found evidence on his computer that linked him to the hacking, the messages, everything. He was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including cyberstalking and harassment. But even after he was taken into custody, the damage had already been done. I felt violated in a way that's hard to explain. It wasn't just about the accounts or the emails. It was the fact that someone I had once trusted had turned my entire life into a game of control. He had stripped away any sense of privacy I had, and made me feel like I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. I've changed all my passwords, installed security software on every device I own, and I'm still paranoid every time I get a new email or notification. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through everything that happened, but I don't know if I'll ever truly feel safe again. What Matt did wasn't just about the technology or the hacking. It was about taking away my ability to feel like I had control over my own life. And that's something I don't think I'll ever fully get back. My ex leaked intimate photos and videos of me after I refused to get back together. I had been dating Jason for about a year and a half. We met at a friend's birthday party in downtown Chicago, and things clicked pretty quickly. He was charming, funny, and we had a lot in common. It didn't take long for us to become inseparable. In the beginning, things were great. We traveled together, spent most of our weekends hanging out with friends, and I thought I had found someone I could see a real future with. But like a lot of relationships, it didn't stay that way. Over time, I started noticing things about Jason that made me uncomfortable. He was controlling, especially when it came to who I spent time with. He would get angry if I went out with friends without him, or if I didn't text him back right away. It was subtle at first, just comments here and there about how I should spend more time with him instead of my friends, or how he didn't like certain people I hung out with. But over time, it became more aggressive. He'd accuse me of not caring about him, or worse, cheating on him if I wasn't with him every weekend. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags earlier, but I convinced myself that he was just insecure, and that things would get better. They didn't. His possessiveness turned into anger, and he started becoming manipulative. He would tell me that no one else would ever love me the way he did, that I wasn't worth the attention of anyone else, and that he was the only one who truly understood me. It took me a long time to see that this was emotional abuse, and when I finally did, I knew I had to get out. Breaking up with Jason wasn't easy. He didn't take it well at all. At first, he tried to sweet-talk me, saying he'd change, that we could make it work if I gave him another chance. But I was done. I had finally realized that this wasn't a healthy relationship, and no amount of promises would fix that. When he saw that I wasn't going to change my mind, things took a darker turn. He started sending me angry texts, accusing me of ruining his life. He showed up at my apartment a few times, begging me to take him back, but I refused to even open the door. I blocked him on everything: social media, phone, everything I could think of. I just wanted to move on, and for a few weeks it seemed like maybe he had given up. That's when the real nightmare began. I'll never forget the first time I found out. I was at work, just a normal Tuesday morning, when my phone started blowing up with notifications. I glanced at it, thinking maybe it was just a group chat being overly active. But what I saw made my stomach drop. There were dozens of messages from people, some I knew, some I didn't, telling me that intimate photos and videos of me had been posted online. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I immediately checked the links they were sending me, and there they were. Photos and videos that I had taken with Jason while we were together. These were private moments, things I had trusted him with, and now they were out there for anyone to see. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the comments. People I didn't even know were talking about my body, making disgusting remarks. It felt like my entire world had collapsed in an instant. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I called my best friend, sobbing, and she came to my office to pick me up. I couldn't even think straight. I had to leave work, and I remember sitting in my apartment in a daze, trying to figure out how this could have happened. The only person who had access to those photos and videos was Jason, and that's when it hit me. He had done this. He had leaked them because I wouldn't take him back. I didn't know what my next step should be. I felt violated in a way that's hard to put into words. It wasn't just the fact that people were seeing me in such a vulnerable state. It was the fact that someone I had trusted had betrayed me in the worst way possible. I felt exposed, powerless, and ashamed, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. The messages and calls didn't stop. Friends were reaching out, trying to see if I was okay, but so were strangers. People I had never met were sending me disgusting comments and threats. It was like a flood of hate that I couldn't stop no matter how many people I blocked or ignored, and worse, some of the images were sent directly to my family. I'll never forget the moment I had to call my parents and explain what had happened. The humiliation of that conversation is something I still haven't fully gotten over. The next few weeks were a blur of panic and stress. I contacted a lawyer and the police to try to get the photos and videos taken down, but it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. Once something is on the internet, it's almost impossible to fully erase it. Even though some of the sites removed the content after I filed complaints, new links would pop up on other platforms. It was like playing whack-a-mole, and I was losing. I tried to go about my life as normally as I could, but everything had changed. I felt like everyone around me knew, even if they didn't. Every time I walked down the street or went to the grocery store, I felt like people were staring at me, judging me. I became paranoid that someone would recognize me from the photos. I stopped going out as much, stopped seeing friends, and became a shell of the person I used to be. The anxiety was overwhelming, and I couldn't focus on anything but the constant fear of being humiliated again. Work was especially hard. I had a pretty good job in marketing, and I was terrified that someone in my office would find out about the photos. I lived in constant fear that a coworker would see them, or worse, that my boss would find out. I felt like I was walking on eggshells every day, just waiting for the bomb to drop. There were times when I considered quitting my job and moving to another city just to escape the embarrassment, but I knew that running wouldn't solve anything. I thought about confronting Jason, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much he had hurt me. Plus, I was scared that if I reached out to him, he would escalate things even further. If he was capable of doing this, who knows what else he might do? I didn't trust him at all, and I wasn't about to take any chances. It wasn't just the emotional toll that was devastating. The legal battle was exhausting and expensive. I had to hire a lawyer to try to get the content taken down from as many sites as possible, and while we had some success, it was a long, drawn-out process. Every time I thought we had made progress, a new site would pop up with the same photos. It felt like I was being haunted by my own past, and no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. One of the worst moments came a few months after everything had started. I was at a family gathering, a birthday party for one of my cousins, and I thought I had finally gotten a break from the nightmare. I was sitting at a table with some relatives when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and there, staring back at me, was one of the leaked photos. I felt sick. It was a reminder that no matter how much I tried to move on, this would always be a part of my life now. I didn't realize how much damage Jason had done to my mental health until months had passed. I started isolating myself from friends and family. I stopped trusting people. I couldn't bear the thought of starting a new relationship, not after what had happened. The idea of getting close to someone again, of letting them into my life, seemed impossible. I couldn't shake the feeling that I would always be judged or looked at differently because of what Jason had done. I never thought something like this would happen to me. I used to think that things like this were something that only happened to celebrities or people in the news. But the truth is, it can happen to anyone, and when it does, it's like your entire life is turned upside down. What Jason did wasn't just about humiliating me. It was about control. He wanted to punish me for leaving him, and this was his way of doing it. Even now, I'm still dealing with the aftermath. The legal battle is ongoing, and while most of the content has been taken down, I know that there are still copies out there. There always will be. That's the reality of the internet. Once something is out there, it's almost impossible to fully erase it. I've come to terms with that, but it doesn't make it any easier to live with. I'm trying to move forward, but the fear and anxiety are still there. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through everything that's happened, but some days it feels like an uphill battle. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you never truly know what someone is capable of. Jason wasn't a monster when we were together, or at least I didn't see him as one. But when I refused to give him what he wanted, he showed me just how far he was willing to go to hurt me. And that's something I'll never forget. My ex launched a smear campaign against me, and it ruined my life for months. I had been in a relationship with Daniel for about a year. We met at a mutual friends party in Chicago, and at first he seemed great. He was charming, smart, and had this confidence that drew me in. We quickly became a couple, and for a while things were good. We went on trips together, spent time with each other's families, and I thought we were solid. But as time went on, I started to notice things that didn't sit right with me. Daniel had this way of twisting the truth, making himself look like the victim in every situation. If we had an argument, he'd always find a way to turn it around on me, like I was the one in the wrong for even bringing it up. He'd say things like, "I just care too much," or "No one else would put up with this from you." At first I ignored it. I thought it was just part of his personality, maybe a quirk. But over time it wore me down. He would gaslight me constantly, making me doubt my own memories and perceptions. There were times I genuinely questioned whether I was overreacting or being unreasonable. But eventually I realized this wasn't normal. and it wasn't healthy. So, after a lot of soul-searching and conversations with friends, I broke up with him. He didn't take it well. At first, Daniel tried to play the whole, "I'm sorry, I'll change" card, but I'd already made up my mind. When he saw that wasn't working, things shifted quickly. He went from apologizing to angry texts, accusing me of ruining his life. I blocked his number, deleted him from social media, and tried to move on. I thought that would be the end of it, but I couldn't have been more wrong. A couple of weeks after the breakup, weird things started happening. Friends of mine, people I'd known for years, started distancing themselves from me. They wouldn't return my texts, or if they did, their responses were short and cold. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just busy. But then I noticed something even more unsettling. I started getting these strange messages from people I barely knew. Some of them mutual friends with Daniel, others complete strangers. The messages accused me of being manipulative, abusive, even violent. People were saying I had cheated on Daniel, that I had emotionally abused him during our relationship, and worse. I was completely blindsided. I had no idea where these accusations were coming from, and I didn't know how to respond. It felt like my world was caving in around me, and I couldn't figure out why. I reached out to a few of my close friends to try and understand what was going on, and that's when I learned the truth. Daniel had been posting about me on social media, publicly. He was making it seem like I had been the villain in our relationship, spinning this elaborate story about how I had mistreated him. Worse, he had evidence. He had doctored screenshots of texts and DMs that made it look like I had said terrible things. It was all fake, but it was convincing enough to fool a lot of people. He created fake accounts to post these things, making it seem like multiple people were backing him up. It didn't take long for his lies to spread. Suddenly, people I had considered friends were turning on me. They believed his version of events, and I couldn't blame them. The screenshots looked real, and his posts were written in a way that made him sound like the victim of a horrible relationship. He was smart about it, too. He didn't come off as overly bitter or angry. Instead, he played the "poor me" card, saying things like, "I just need support right now," and "I never thought she would do this to me." It was manipulative, and it worked. I tried to defend myself, but no one seemed to believe me. When I told people the screenshots were fake, they acted like I was just trying to cover my tracks. It didn't help that Daniel was always one step ahead. Every time I tried to respond or explain my side of the story, he would post something new, further discrediting me. It was like he had planned this whole thing out, knowing exactly how to make me look like the bad guy. The worst part was that I didn't know how far it would go. Daniel wasn't content just to ruin my reputation with our mutual friends. He started posting about me in local Facebook groups, on Reddit, and even on Twitter. He was spreading lies about me to complete strangers, people I had never met, people who didn't know me but were now convinced I was this awful person. I started getting harassing messages from random accounts, people calling me names, threatening me, telling me I deserved everything that was happening. It was relentless. Every time I opened my phone, there was something new. Another post, another comment, another message. It got to the point where I was scared to check my notifications because I didn't know what fresh hell was waiting for me. I felt like I was under siege, like no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the barrage of hate coming my way. It was exhausting. My mental health took a nosedive. I was anxious all the time, constantly worrying about what new lie Daniel was going to spread about me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, and barely had the energy to leave my apartment. I started isolating myself from everyone because I didn't know who I could trust. Even the people who were still talking to me felt distant, like they were questioning whether I was telling the truth. I became paranoid, second-guessing every interaction I had. At some point, Daniel's lies started to bleed into my professional life. I work as a freelance graphic designer, and I rely heavily on my online portfolio and social media presence to attract clients. Daniel knew this, and he used it against me. He started posting fake reviews about my work, saying I was unprofessional and unreliable. He even went as far as to message some of my clients directly, sending them the same fake screenshots and accusing me of all kinds of things. I lost a few clients because of it. They didn't say it outright, but I could tell by the way they suddenly stopped responding to my emails or canceled upcoming projects. It was devastating. Not only was Daniel destroying my personal life, but now he was coming after my livelihood too. I thought about going to the police, but I wasn't sure what they could even do. It wasn't like Daniel was physically threatening me, and I didn't have any proof that he was behind the fake accounts. He was smart about covering his tracks, making it hard to trace anything back to him. I felt helpless, like there was no way to stop him. One day, I woke up to find that Daniel had posted another fake message, this time claiming that I had threatened him. He had doctored a screenshot of a conversation where I supposedly told him I was going to ruin his life. It was complete bullshit, but it didn't matter. People believed it. They started calling me a psycho, saying I deserved everything that was happening to me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to show them the truth, but I didn't know how. I ended up deleting most of my social media accounts, hoping that if I disappeared from the internet, Daniel would lose interest. But even that didn't stop him. He kept going, finding new ways to spread his lies. At one point, he even reached out to my family, sending them the same fake screenshots and telling them that I was unstable. I had to have a difficult conversation with my parents, explaining what was going on and trying to convince them that none of it was true. They believed me. But the fact that Daniel had crossed that line made me feel even more violated. It felt like there was no escape. Everywhere I turned, there was another reminder of what Daniel was doing to me. I started having panic attacks, something I'd never experienced before. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart racing, unable to breathe, convinced that my life was falling apart and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Eventually, I knew I couldn't keep living like that. I contacted a lawyer and started the process of filing a defamation suit against Daniel. It wasn't an easy decision, but I didn't see any other way to protect myself. I had to fight back, even though I knew it would be a long and expensive process. But while the legal battle was ongoing, the damage had already been done. Daniel's lies were out there, and there was no way to completely erase them. People who didn't even know me believed the worst about me, and I didn't know how to fix that. I don't think I ever will. Looking back, I wish I had seen the signs sooner. I wish I had realized what Daniel was capable of before it was too late. But the truth is, you never really know what someone is capable of until they've already crossed that line. My ex ruined my financial life by taking out loans in my name without me knowing. I met Alex in college. We both went to Northwestern University in Chicago, and he was one of those guys who always seemed to have his life together. He was charming, confident, and had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room when he talked to you. We started dating during our junior year, and everything seemed perfect at first. He was supportive, funny, and always knew how to make me feel better when I was stressed about classes or internships. We stayed together after graduation, and it wasn't long before we moved in together. By that time, I had landed a decent job in marketing, and Alex was working at a tech startup. Our apartment was in a nice part of Chicago, Logan Square, and life seemed to be going pretty well. We talked about the future a lot. And while we had our ups and downs, I genuinely believed we were building something solid together. Looking back now, I can see that there were signs, little red flags that I ignored because I didn't want to believe they meant anything. Alex had always been a bit secretive about his finances. He'd brush off conversations about money, saying things like, "It's all under control," or "I've got it handled." Whenever I asked about how we were going to split bills or save for the future, he'd give vague answers and tell me not to worry about it. I trusted him, so I let it go. For the first few years, things were fine. We both worked hard, went out with friends on weekends, and lived what I thought was a pretty normal life. But then, around the time we hit our 3rd year of living together, things started to change. Alex became more withdrawn, and there were moments where I noticed he was more stressed than usual. He wasn't coming home at the same time anymore, and he'd spend hours on his laptop without saying much. I chalked it up to work stress. He was always talking about how his startup was going through a rough patch, and I assumed that's where his head was. It wasn't until we broke up that I found out the real reason behind his stress. The breakup itself wasn't anything dramatic. We had grown apart over time, and while it was hard, I thought we both handled it fairly maturely. We agreed that I'd stay in the apartment for a while since I was on the lease, and Alex moved out. There wasn't any huge argument, no massive fallout, just two people realizing they weren't right for each other anymore. A few weeks after the breakup, I started noticing something strange. I received a letter from a credit card company that I didn't recognize, saying I was behind on payments for a card I had never applied for. My first thought was that it was a mistake or some kind of scam, so I called the company to sort it out. They told me the card had been opened in my name over a year ago and that I owed several $1,000s in charges. I was shocked. I hadn't opened any new credit cards in years, and I definitely hadn't made any of those purchases. I immediately checked my credit report and found that not only was there this credit card I didn't know about, but there were also multiple loans and lines of credit taken out in my name. My stomach dropped. How had I not noticed this before? I had been so careful with my finances, always making sure to pay off my debts and save where I could. But now, according to my credit report, I was tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and my credit score had plummeted. I went into full panic mode. I started calling every company listed on my credit report, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. That's when I realized the truth. Alex had been opening accounts in my name for months, maybe even years, without me knowing. He had taken out loans, maxed out credit cards, and racked up an enormous amount of debt all under my name. And I hadn't noticed a thing. At first, I couldn't believe it. How could someone I had lived with, someone I had trusted, do something like this? But the more I dug into it, the clearer it became. Alex had used my personal information, things he had access to because we lived together and shared bills, to take out loans and credit cards. He was good at hiding it, making sure I never saw the bills or noticed the missing money. I felt like such an idiot for not seeing it sooner, but he had been so careful, so manipulative. I confronted him about it, but of course he denied everything. He claimed it was some kind of mix-up, that maybe someone had stolen both of our information, but I knew it was a lie. The timing, the accounts, everything pointed back to him. I didn't want to believe it, but I didn't have a choice. The evidence was right in front of me. The next few months were hell. I had to file reports with the police, contact all the lenders, and start the process of disputing the charges. It was overwhelming. Every time I thought I had made progress, another letter or bill would show up, reminding me of how deep this mess went. I spent hours on the phone with credit bureaus trying to clean up the damage Alex had done to my credit score, but it felt like an impossible task. The worst part was the financial strain. I had always been careful with money, making sure to save and plan for the future. But now, thanks to Alex, I was drowning in debt that wasn't even mine. I couldn't afford my rent anymore, and I had to move out of the apartment we had shared. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while because I couldn't financially handle living on my own with the damage he had caused. It was humiliating. I was in my late 20s, and I had thought I was on the right track, but now I was back to square one. The emotional toll was just as bad, if not worse. I couldn't trust anyone. I started second-guessing every interaction, every relationship I had. If someone I had lived with for years could betray me like this, how could I ever trust anyone again? I felt like a fool for not seeing it sooner, for letting myself be so vulnerable to someone who clearly didn't care about me the way I thought he did. I lost touch with a lot of friends during that time. I didn't want to talk about what was happening, and honestly, I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell people that your ex ruined your financial life and left you drowning in debt? I was embarrassed, ashamed, and angry. I didn't want to be seen as a victim, but that's exactly what I had become. As the months went on, I started piecing my life back together. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt like I was never going to dig myself out of the hole Alex had put me in. I spent hours fighting with creditors, sending in police reports and affidavits to prove that I hadn't taken out those loans. It was exhausting, and there were days when I wanted to give up. But slowly, things started to get better. I was able to get some of the accounts closed and the debts removed from my credit report, but not all of them. Some companies refused to believe that I hadn't been involved, and I'm still dealing with the fallout from that. My credit score is still lower than it was before, and I've had to delay a lot of the plans I had for my future because of it. Buying a home, saving for retirement, everything feels like it's been pushed back by years. I wish I could say there was some kind of justice in all of this, but there wasn't. Alex never faced any real consequences for what he did. Sure, I filed police reports, but financial crimes like this are hard to prosecute, especially when it's someone you were in a relationship with. I tried to take him to court, but by that point he had disappeared. Last I heard, he had moved out of state, probably trying to pull the same scam on someone else. I still don't know how he justified what he did. Maybe he thought he'd never get caught. Or maybe he just didn't care about the consequences. Either way, I was left picking up the pieces of a life I had thought was secure. It took me years to rebuild my credit, and even now I'm not fully back to where I was before. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.